Now, there was a time that one could search for news online or log on to social media applications such as Twitter, Facebook, and even opening your newspaper, trusting that the news or the headline that appeared there were factual, accurate, and credible, even if they carried some bias. However, that is increasingly no longer the case with the advent of fake news, which presents fiction as fact. Against a global background of fake news, alternative facts, and misinformation, the South African online and social media space seems to be endorsing what has become a worldwide trend. Here's an example. Talk Radio 702, Sunday Times, Huffington Post, South Africa editor-at-large Ferial Haffajee were targeted in a bizarre Twitter campaign against the Finance Minister Pravin Gordhan last week. We've seen it in the newspapers. Those tweets were made to look as if they come from the established media houses and journalists. Joining us now in studio, Sam Mkokeli is the Media Freedom Subcommittee Chairperson at the South African National Editors Forum, SANEF. A very good morning to you, sir, and welcome.
Thank you, Elvis.
What is your take on the overall increase and the sense of increase of fake news in the country?
It's a terrible development. We noticed last year that the mushrooming of a number of websites, they're similar to the names of the established news outlets, and they were carrying stories that were patently false, and some of them were hateful. For example, one of the reports said that Desmond Tutu, the Archbishop, had died. I mean, that story is definitely undesirable. So we've seen this, and we condemn this trend because it causes a whole lot of confusion in society. It subverts democracy, and it raises questions of credibility, and when people start questioning the veracity of information out there.
A credibility, especially for the media industry in South Africa, I mean, that is core, isn't it? So will this not drive perhaps alternative fact?
Yeah, I mean, there is a trend, and it's quite a catchy term now when you see in the United States, people are talking about alternative fact. And the post-truth stage we've reached as a global village altogether. But I don't think this changes much in terms of the credibility of news outlets out there. News outlets have not changed. If they didn't have credibility, they still don't have. If they had credibility, they still have. So what's really happened is there's a new extension, really, in what's available out there. There's a lot of false news outlets. I mean, that's caused a confusion. So if you remain a consumer of the outlets that you had been consuming, nothing changes for you. But then there's a confusion if you move in between different platforms and outlets.
Is this emergence of fake news a new thing, or was it there all along? Some people would call it just plain propaganda.
No, there's a difference between propaganda and a parody and fake news. Fake news has always been there, but now within the .com era, and lots of apps are being out there, different websites and social media outlets. Now we're seeing a whole lot of it now coming through social media. There is actually an increase in terms of the availability of such.
Eben?
Mr. Mkokeli, if I can ask you the role of media houses in perpetuating this idea of fake news a little bit. Some of the headlines you see sometimes are borderline. They play in the grey area. I don't know if it's an industry standard to try and push circulation by sometimes dodgy headlines. One can call it that, and it stems from there. How much guilt do the media houses have in this matter?
I think we'd need to separate the two if we have to have that conversation. Fake news is totally different to us being able to critique newspapers and say their headlines are crazy, they're controversial, they're tabloids, and they're different. That's something that's always been there. Newspapers will try different means to catch consumers. I mean, it's their duty. But then consumers have their right to vote with their money if they find that the news is not as credible. Fake news is totally different to that.
Doesn't that kind of set the tone or embolden those creators of fake news? Oh, they operate in the grey, we can stretch it, no?
I don't think people who drive propaganda. I mean, the incident mentioned by Elvis earlier, Huffington Post and Ferial Haffajee, that's a totally different context. The context of that, you have to locate it within the debate about a so-called state capture. Ferial Haffajee is one of the leading journalists in South Africa who's been writing quite boldly about state capture. So it's only natural that she gets drawn into this web and where people are creating things that are hateful to her, but it's part of that narrative or counter-narrative against state capture. And it's totally different to what newspapers would do generally to push the envelope a little bit
Now, Sam, that leads me to my next question, because we're asking our viewers, how do you spot fake news? Or how do you spot a fake website or fake Twitter account or that sort of thing? How do you do that? And is there a way to sort of look at that and say, how do I deal with it?
It is easy, it's also not.
Yes.
Sometimes the websites, for example, if somebody runs a parody account of Times Live, for example, they would just tweak one letter in Times Live, for example, or this add Times Live 1, or somebody will create an account that says Mzansi Live. If you're not familiar with Times Live, you might just believe that it's a real deal when it isn't. So just got to be careful when you are punching in the name of that website. Just make sure that you're using the one you're used to. And also, as you go through the content, sometimes there'll be spelling errors and grammar errors. Sometimes they're easy to spot. Sometimes they look legit. I mean, I've been fooled by one of them myself. But you just need to spend a bit more time and say, hey, is this real? Am I really watching a credible news site? Is this running off the main website? Can I go through my desktop to see if this is the newspaper, or is this off the app, the established app of the newspaper? So the best thing really would advise consumers is stick with the trusted brands. If your brand is 404, stick to 404. If it's a BD Live, by all means go back to BD Live. If it's running off your Facebook timeline, you have to actually have a bit of doubt.
Now, earlier we mentioned a number of fake sites that came out a couple of weeks ago, especially this one with Ferrell Haffajee. Now, reports of a public relations company that was based in London was responsible for this. So what sort of sanction are there for those type of people found guilty of this type of act?
Look, it's a very tricky thing. I think Rafa mentioned in the earlier slaughter, but that there's no law that says people can't say nasty things about one another. So it's a grey area. But it's been encouraging to hear that the Hawks are keen to investigate the people behind this. Perhaps they're thinking there could be a case of criminal injury against people who do these things. But I mean, most of these things, if it's generally a defamation, it would be a civil case, or you'd have to take somebody to the courts and prove that you've been defamed by their action. So it is quite a grey area, and then the criminal law aspect of it. But in terms of general parody, it's not really illegal. People are allowed to say nasty things about one another. And there are a couple of our presidents in South Africa. You may remember in the early 2000s, the South African breweries took a laugh off, which was a parody company, really, to court over a T-shirt that SAB didn't like, because it said it changed a few words of the SABC advertising to say black labor, white guilt. Yes. And the SABC lost throughout the courts, and it went to the Constitutional Court, where Justice Moseneke, in the main judgment, said, hey, let's laugh at each other. And then Albie Sachs, in the concurring judgment, said, okay, it's fine to laugh at one another.
Yeah. Yeben?
Just in conclusion, you know, the role of journalists in our industry, there's been fears, of course, with the rise of the citizen journalist and social media sites, that our job is under threat, that, you know, we're going to be shedding jobs because this thing's gone mainstream. Everyone's a journalist now. Does it now mean that our job is becoming more important because we're the pros that have to distinguish and make sure that the facts are checked and right?
Of course, I mean, this is a downside of this new era where everybody who has access to a smartphone can be a journalist. They can be their own publishers and editors, and they can just tweet and everybody follows and think it's legit. But now it just shows you that you need credible institutions to keep doing what they're doing and go through all those checks that the media, mainstream media, has developed to tighten things up. But it just means that the consumer, as well as to catch on to the new era where they have to be extremely careful with the things they read, and just make sure that they're reading it from credible institutions.
Mr. Mkokeli, as a society, should we be concerned about this increase in fake news and that actually are being used to discredit some personalities and even some organizations?
Of course. I mean, it causes confusion in society. I mean, the real effect is that it subverts democracy. And news media exists in that space to help establish democracy and make sure that there's access to information and there's democratic accountability. When it's so confusing, then the other things, I mean, can't be achieved.
In 15 seconds from SANEF, your message to consumers of news out there.
Go through carefully what you read. If it's running off your Facebook timeline and it's not running anywhere else, it means it's possibly not true.
Short and sweet. Thank you, Mr. Mkokeli. That was Sam Mkokeli. He's the Media Freedom Subcommittee Chairperson at the South African National Editors Forum, SANEF.